This story contains themes that some listeners may find unsettling. Listener discretion is advised. It was the third Tuesday of the month when I first saw him. Not the first time I saw a postman, mind you. I'd been living in Maple Creek for nearly 3 months by then, trying to outrun the city noise and the ghosts of my own past. Maple Creek was supposed to be quiet, predictable, a place where the biggest drama was Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning petunias or the annual bake sale. But then I saw him, and everything I thought I knew about quiet predictability shattered. He was a man of habit, this postman. Every weekday, precisely at 10:17 a.m., his faded blue mail truck would rumble down Elm Street. He'd pause at each mailbox, a practice flick of the wrist, a metallic clink, and then move on. Efficient, robotic almost, until he reached the house at the very end of the cul-de-sac. Number 147. The Miller house. The house that wasn't there anymore. Not really. It was a skeleton of a home, a charred monument to some forgotten tragedy. The fire had ripped through it 6 months before I even set foot in Maple Creek, leaving behind a husk of blackened timber and crumbling brick. The roof was gone, a gaping maw open to the sky. Windows were empty, vacant eyes staring out at the world. The lawn was overgrown, choked with weeds and the ghosts of whatever life had once flourished there. A do not enter sign, faded and peeling, leaned precariously against what used to be a picket fence. It was, by all accounts, uninhabitable. A ruin. Yet, every single weekday, precisely at 10:23 a.m., the postman would pull up to the curbside mailbox of number 147. He'd kill the engine, get out, walk up the short, weed-choked path and open the mailbox. And he would put mail inside. I first noticed it from my kitchen window, sipping my morning coffee, watching the world unfold. My house, number 145, was just 2 doors down. Close enough to see, not quite close enough to understand. The first time I thought it was a mistake. Maybe he had the wrong address. Maybe he was just clearing out old mail. A final duty before the property was officially condemned or rebuilt. But then he did it again. And again. And again. It became a macabre ritual. A silent, unsettling performance put on for an audience of one me. Every morning I found myself drawn to the window, a strange blend of fascination and dread twisting in my gut. He never varied his routine, never glanced around, never seemed to acknowledge the gaping hole where a living room should have been, or the acrid smell of burnt wood that still clung to the air on humid days. He just delivered. To a burnt-down house. My name is Michael, by the way, and I moved to Maple Creek seeking peace. What I found was a mystery that started to unravel the very fabric of that peace, thread by agonizing thread. First, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a squatter receiving mail? Unlikely, given the house's condition and the official warnings. Perhaps the owners, whoever they were having their mail forwarded there by mistake? Also unlikely. The mail service is notoriously efficient with address changes, and a house completely destroyed by fire would surely trigger a red flag. Maybe it was junk mail, just indiscriminately shoved into any available slot? But I'd seen him carefully place envelopes inside, sometimes even a small package. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. The more I watched, the more questions piled up. Who was this mail for? Why was it still being sent to a place that no longer existed? And why, for the love of everything logical, was the postman still delivering it? I tried asking around subtly at first. My next-door neighbor, Jessica, a kind woman with a perpetually sunny disposition and an encyclopedic knowledge of Maple Creek gossip, was my first target. "Hey, Jessica." I'd started one afternoon, leaning over our shared fence trying to sound casual. "You know anything about the old Miller place down the street? Number 147. Jessica's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, the Miller house. Terrible tragedy that was. Poor old Mr. Miller, bless his soul. Died in the fire, they say. Heart attack probably before the smoke even got him. His wife Eleanor, she was already gone years ago. No kids. Just him and that beautiful old house." Right. I nodded, trying to steer her. "So it's just abandoned then? No one living there since?" She shook her head, a sympathetic frown etching her brow. "Oh heavens no. It's a complete write-off. Insurance nightmare, I hear. The town's been trying to get it demolished, but there's some legal red tape with distant relatives, I think. Just sitting there, a sad reminder." "And the mail?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Does anyone still get mail there?" Jessica paused, tilting her head. "Mail? To the Miller house? Why no, Michael. Of course not. Who would it be for? Mr. Miller's gone. And Eleanor, well, she'd been gone even longer. All their mail would have been stopped or redirected years ago. Besides, she added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, David, our postman, he's a stickler for rules. He wouldn't deliver to an empty house, let alone one that's, well, a shell. David. So the postman had a name. And according to Jessica, David was a stickler for rules. This only deepened the mystery, because David, the rule stickler, was absolutely, undeniably delivering mail to the Miller house every single weekday. I thanked Jessica, feigning a sudden interest in my own overgrown rose bushes, my mind racing. Jessica wasn't lying. Her sincerity was palpable. But my own two eyes weren't lying either. There was a disconnect, a glaring inconsistency that gnawed at me. The next morning I was at the window even earlier. 10:17 a.m. The blue truck. David, a man in his late 50s, maybe early 60s, with a receding hairline and a perpetually mild expression, emerged. He moved with a familiar, practiced rhythm. Stop. Open box. Deposit mail. Close box. Move on. 10:23 a.m. He reached 147. His movements didn't change. No hesitation. No visible recognition of the devastation before him. He simply walked up, opened the charred mailbox and placed a handful of envelopes inside. Then he turned, got back in his truck and drove away, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than usual. I watched him go, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. What if the mail wasn't for Mr. Miller? What if it was for someone else? Someone who didn't want to be found. Someone connected to the fire. That thought, once it took root, began to sprout tendrils of unease. Maple Creek, with its quiet streets and friendly faces, suddenly felt less like a haven and more like a stage for a secret play. The burnt-out shell of 147 wasn't just a sad reminder. It was an active participant, a silent receiver of secrets. I started keeping a log. Dates, times, observations. It felt absurd, like something out of a pulp fiction novel, but I couldn't help myself. The postman's routine was so precise, so unwavering, it felt almost ritualistic. And what kind of ritual involved delivering mail to a dead man's defunct house? I considered confronting him, walking out there asking him directly, but something held me back. A fear of looking foolish, perhaps, or a deeper, more primal instinct that whispered, "Don't interfere." This wasn't just a quirky anomaly. It felt like a boundary I shouldn't cross. One afternoon, a week after my conversation with Jessica, I was working in my garage, the door open, when David's truck drove past. He saw me, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and continued on his route. His eyes, though, lingered for just a fraction of a second too long. Or maybe I was just imagining it, projecting my own paranoia onto an innocent man. Later that day I took a walk. Not just around my block, but a longer stroll, heading towards the edge of town, letting my thoughts wander. I found myself circling back, inevitably, towards Elm Street. As I approached the Miller house, the late afternoon sun cast long, skeletal shadows across its burnt facade. It looked even more desolate, more haunted in that fading light. I stopped across the street, pretending to tie my shoe, my eyes fixed on the mailbox. It was a standard black metal box, slightly warped from the heat of the fire, but otherwise intact. What was inside? Bills? Advertisements? Or something else entirely? The urge to look was overwhelming. To just open it, glance inside, and put an end to this tormenting curiosity. But the "do not enter" sign, the unseen eyes of Maple Creek, and a healthy dose of self-preservation kept me rooted. Besides, it felt like breaking some unspoken rule, infringing on a private, albeit bizarre, transaction. I thought about the previous owner, Mr. Miller. Jessica had said he died in the fire. A heart attack. A tragic accident. But what if it wasn't? What if the mail held a clue? What if the postman wasn't just delivering mail, but was part of something much larger, much darker? The rational part of my brain screamed at me to let it go, to focus on my own life, the new start I craved. But the other part, the part that thrives on puzzles and whispers in the dark, knew I couldn't. Not anymore. The postman, the burnt-down house, the silent deliveries. It had become an itch I couldn't scratch, a song I couldn't get out of my head. It was no longer just a curiosity, it was a challenge. And I was starting to suspect that someone somewhere didn't want this challenge to be met. The next morning, as David's blue truck pulled away from 147, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to watch anymore. I was going to find out what was inside that mailbox, and I was going to find out why. The peace I sought in Maple Creek was already shattered. Now I needed answers, and I had a chilling feeling those answers would lead me down a path far darker than I could ever imagine. The chilling feeling lingered, a cold knot in my stomach that no amount of rationalization could loosen. I stood there, the weight of the mailbag heavy on my shoulder, but the weight in my heart felt heavier. The burnt-out shell of the house on Elm Street, with its perfectly intact, mail-filled box, had become an inescapable enigma. My peaceful new life in Maple Creek, the quiet existence I'd sought, was already dissolving into something far more unsettling. I knew with a certainty that prickled my skin that I couldn't just deliver the mail and walk away. Not anymore. My route for the day was far from over, but my mind was already racing, replaying the image of that mailbox, a stark, defiant sentinel against the backdrop of destruction. I finished the rest of my deliveries on autopilot, each house a blur, each mailbox a dull thud, my thoughts constantly returning to Elm Street. The sun, usually a welcome companion, seemed to mock me with its indifferent warmth. As soon as my shift ended, instead of heading straight home, I found myself driving back towards the heart of Maple Creek. My first stop, the local post office. It was a small brick building, much like everything else in town, exuding a quaint, almost sleepy charm. Inside, the air conditioning hummed, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat outside. I approached the counter, where an older man with a neatly trimmed gray mustache and a perpetually tired expression was sorting packages. His name tag read Robert Peterson. "Excuse me, Robert," I began, trying to sound casual. "I'm the new carrier on Route 3. Came across something a little unusual today." Robert merely grunted, not looking up from a stack of padded envelopes. "Unusual is Tuesday in this job, kid. What is it?" "It's the house on Elm Street," I said, watching for any flicker of recognition. "Number 142, the one that burned down a few years back." This time he paused, a package suspended in his hands. He slowly looked up, his eyes a faded blue meeting mine. There was a brief, unreadable quality in his gaze before it hardened into something dismissive. "Ah, that one. The Miller place." "The Miller place?" I pressed. "I delivered mail there today, to a mailbox attached to nothing but charred wood, and it already had mail in it. Quite a bit, actually." Robert sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of years of postal service. "Yeah, that happens sometimes. Bureaucracy, you know? Addresses stay active longer than the actual buildings. Or folks keeping an address for legal stuff, insurance claims, forwarders that never got updated. Happens more than you'd think." He shrugged, resuming his sorting. "Just keep delivering it. Someone's paying for it to go somewhere, even if it's just to sit there." "But it's been years, hasn't it?" I persisted. "And the house is a complete ruin. It's not just a vacant lot. It's a burned-out shell. Why would anyone keep an active address there?" Robert finally set down the last package, leaning against the counter, his arms crossed. "Look, son, I've been doing this for 35 years. You learn not to ask too many questions. Your job is to deliver the mail. If it's got a valid address and postage, it goes in the box. End of story." He paused, a hint of something else in his voice now, softer, almost like a warning. "Some things are best left alone in a town like Maple Creek. Folks here value their privacy. And some tragedies, well, they just stay tragedies. No need to poke at old wounds." He offered no further explanation, just a stern, knowing look. His words, intended to quell my curiosity, only fanned the flames. "Some things are best left alone." That phrase echoed in my head, not as a caution but as a challenge. Robert, with his decades of experience, had clearly encountered more than just bureaucratic quirks. He was actively avoiding the subject. Leaving the post office, I felt a familiar frustration bubbling up. It was clear I wouldn't get answers from official channels. If I wanted to understand this bizarre situation, I'd have to dig deeper myself. And in a small town like Maple Creek, the best place to find unofficial information wasn't a government building, but the local gossip hub. I drove a few blocks down to the Maple Leaf Diner. The scent of frying bacon and stale coffee hit me even before I pushed open the door. Inside, the diner was a tableau of small-town life. A few regulars hunched over newspapers, a couple of older women chatting animatedly over pie, and a young waitress, probably in her early 20s, bustling between tables. She had bright, curious eyes and a name tag that read Sarah. I slid into a booth near the window, ordering a coffee and a slice of apple pie. When Sarah came to take my order, I decided to try a different approach. "So I'm new in town," I began, feigning casual conversation. "Just started as a mail carrier. It's a nice route mostly." Sarah smiled, pushing a stray strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "Welcome to Maple Creek. Hope you like it here." "It's quiet." "It is," I agreed, though I did come across something a bit out of place today. The old burnt house on Elm Street, number 142, still has a mailbox, still gets mail. Sarah's smile faltered. Her eyes, which had been so bright, seemed to dim slightly. She glanced nervously towards the kitchen, then back at me, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "The Miller place? Oh, yeah, no one really talks about that much anymore." "Why not?" I asked, my heart quickening. This was it. This was the opening. She wrung her hands slightly, picking at a loose thread on her apron. "It was bad. The fire. Years ago now, but everyone remembers. The Millers, they just disappeared after it. No one ever really saw them again. Just packed up and left, or so the story goes. Some say they just couldn't bear to stay after everything." "Everything?" I prompted gently. "What happened?" Sarah hesitated, her gaze drifting out the window, as if seeing ghosts in the placid street. "It was a terrible fire. Took everything. And, well, their little girl, Emily. She was inside. They never found her." A cold shock went through me. A child. Emily. The casualness with which Robert had dismissed the address now felt like a betrayal. This wasn't just a bureaucratic error. It was connected to a profound tragedy. And the Millers supposedly disappeared. But their mail was still being delivered. It didn't add up. They never found her? I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "But what about the parents? Michael and Jessica Miller, was it?" Sarah nodded slowly. "That's what people say. Michael and Jessica. They were devastated, of course. Lost everything. Their home, their little Emily. They left right after the funeral, didn't even wait for the insurance to settle. Just packed what little they had and were gone. No forwarding address, nothing. Just vanished." She shuddered slightly. "It's why no one talks about it. It's just too sad. And a little creepy, you know? A whole family just gone like that." I thanked her, my appetite for pie completely gone. The coffee tasted bitter. The pieces were starting to fit together, but in the most disturbing way imaginable. A family, a child lost in a fire, parents disappearing, and yet, mail still being delivered to the ruins of their tragedy. Robert's old wounds comment made horrifying sense now. As I left the diner, the earlier feeling of unease had sharpened into a profound sense of dread. The serene facade of Maple Creek was cracking, revealing something dark and sorrowful underneath. I drove aimlessly for a while, the afternoon sun dipping lower, casting long, unsettling shadows. My mind kept replaying Sarah's words, especially the part about Emily. Before I knew it, my car was once again turning onto Elm Street. The burnt house loomed ahead, even more menacing in the fading light. This time I didn't just stop at the curb. I parked down the street, out of immediate sight, and approached the property on foot. The air here was different. Heavy. Still carried that faint, acrid smell of ash, even years later. I walked around the perimeter, my footsteps crunching softly on dead leaves and scattered debris. The wind whispered through the charred remains of what must have been a beautiful garden. I noticed the mailbox again, gleaming unnaturally white in the gloom, a beacon of forgotten communication. But my eyes were drawn lower, towards the overgrown, desolate flower beds that lined what was once the front porch. And there it was, almost completely buried beneath a tangle of weeds and blackened earth. Something small and brightly colored caught my eye. I knelt, pushing aside the brittle foliage, and my breath hitched. It was a child's toy, a small plastic doll, its face melted and distorted on one side, but still recognizable. Its tiny painted blue eyes stared up at me, vacant and unsettling. It wasn't just a random piece of debris. It was deeply embedded, as if it had been there for a long time, yet it was surprisingly intact, considering the inferno that had consumed the house. And it was positioned as if someone had placed it there deliberately, not just dropped it. My mind reeled. If the Millers had left immediately after the fire, if everything was destroyed, how could this toy be here, so visible yet so hidden, so present? It felt too deliberate, too poignant to be an accident. It couldn't have survived the fire in this condition, and if it had, surely cleanup crews or the Millers themselves would have found it. A shiver ran down my spine, more potent than any cold draft. This wasn't just an administrative oversight. This was a mystery, layered with tragedy and unanswered questions. The toy, a silent witness, whispered of something far more sinister than a simple fire. It was a clue, a deliberate breadcrumb left for someone to find. And I had a terrifying feeling that someone had intended for me to find it. I stood up slowly, my gaze sweeping over the skeletal remains of the house, then back to the mailbox, still holding its secrets. The peace I had sought in Maple Creek was not just shattered, it was utterly obliterated. I was no longer just a postman. I was a man standing on the edge of a deep, dark abyss, compelled to look inside. And I knew with a chilling certainty that I had to go back, not just to observe but to find a way in, to find out what horrors the ashes of the Miller house still concealed, and why, after all this time, someone was still sending mail to a ghost. The image of that empty, charred shell of a house, and the chilling thought of mail being delivered to it, burrowed deep into my mind. It was a phantom limb, a persistent ache I couldn't ignore. Sleep that night was a fractured landscape of smoke and shadows, the faint scent of ash clinging to my imagination. By morning, the decision was made. I couldn't just stand by. I had to go back. Not as Michael, the mailman, but as Michael, the man consumed by an unsettling curiosity, compelled to uncover the truth. I waited until the cloak of dusk had fully settled over the town, painting the sky in bruised purples and grays. The air was cool, carrying the faint earthy smell of impending rain. I dressed in dark, nondescript clothes, grabbed a sturdy backpack, a powerful flashlight, and a pair of work gloves. My heart was a drum against my ribs, each beat a stark reminder of the line I was about to cross. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was an intrusion, a trespass into a place that time and tragedy had sealed off. The drive to the Miller house felt longer than usual, the familiar road transforming into an ominous path. As I turned onto the overgrown driveway, the headlights cut through the encroaching darkness, illuminating the skeletal remains of the house. It stood silhouetted against the dim sky, a monument to loss, its jagged edges like broken teeth. The mailbox, now a focal point of my obsession, was a dark sentinel by the curb. I parked a little distance away, killed the engine, and plunged myself into the silence of the night. Stepping out, the air was heavy still. A profound quiet enveloped me, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze. There were no lights from neighboring houses, no signs of life. The Miller's property was isolated, almost forgotten by the rhythms of the world. I pulled my hood up, took a deep breath, and began my approach. The ground was uneven, choked with weeds and the ghosts of what was once a manicured lawn. My shoes crunched softly on scattered debris, fragments of pottery, slivers of glass, pieces of charred wood. The smell was immediate and potent, a lingering stench of smoke, damp ash, and decay, a grim perfume that clung to the air. As I drew closer, the scale of the destruction became even more apparent. The roof was largely gone, collapsed into the interior, leaving gaping holes open to the sky. Walls stood, but they were scarred, blackened, and unstable, threatening to crumble at a touch. I circled the perimeter cautiously, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The front door was a gaping maw, its frame twisted and warped. Windows were shattered, their glass long since fallen, leaving empty eyesores. I moved slowly, my senses heightened, listening for any sound beyond my own pounding heart. Nothing, just the wind sighing through the ruins. Reaching the back of the house, I found what looked like a slightly less damaged area. A small window, though broken, was relatively low to the ground. It looked like an entry point. With a deep breath, I pulled on my gloves, pushed aside some loose debris, and carefully hoisted myself through the opening. The crunch of my boots on the ash-covered floor echoed eerily in the vast, silent space. I was inside. The beam of my flashlight danced across the interior, revealing a scene of utter desolation. What was once a home, filled with laughter and life, was now a sepulchre of ash and broken dreams. Charred timbers crisscrossed above me like a giant, skeletal ribcage. The floor was a treacherous landscape of collapsed plaster, burnt furniture fragments, and layers of fine, gray ash that billowed up with every step. Each breath I took filled my lungs with the acrid taste of history, of tragedy. My first priority was to find the mail. I navigated through the debris-strewn living room, moving towards where I remembered the miller's mailbox being positioned relative to the front door. If mail was being delivered, it had to be here or near here. I found it, or what was left of it. A metal wall-mounted mailbox, miraculously still somewhat intact, albeit blackened and warped by the heat. My heart quickened. I reached for the latch, my fingers brushing against the cold, sooty metal. It opened with a rusty creak that seemed deafening in the silence. Empty. Completely, utterly empty. No pile of ignored letters, no stack of junk mail. Nothing. This was far more disturbing than finding a decade's worth of unopened mail. It meant someone was collecting it. Someone was coming here regularly into this burnt-out shell to retrieve the mail. But who? And why? What could possibly be so important, so sensitive, that it needed to be delivered to a house that officially no longer existed, and then immediately retrieved? A shiver ran down my spine, colder than the night air. I swept my flashlight beam across the floor around the mailbox. The ash was thick, undisturbed by wind or rain in this somewhat sheltered spot. But as I crouched down, examining the powdery surface, I saw it. Faint, almost imperceptible, but there. A series of faint indentations in the ash, leading away from the mailbox, deeper into the house. Footprints. Not mine. They were shallower, less defined, suggesting someone lighter, or perhaps someone who had been here multiple times, carefully treading the same path. I followed them, my flashlight beam leading the way. The footprints led into what I guessed was once the main hallway. The air here felt heavier, colder, as if the very walls absorbed warmth. The silence pressed in, amplifying the soft scuff of my boots. I moved slowly, carefully, my eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. The footprints continued, weaving through the debris, sometimes disappearing under a pile of rubble, only to reappear on the other side. They weren't just random wanderings. They suggested a purpose, a destination. They led me deeper, past the skeletal remains of what might have been a dining room, past a kitchen reduced to twisted metal and ceramic shards. The destruction here was absolute. But then the footprints took a sharp turn, leading towards the back of the house, to a section that seemed slightly less exposed to the elements, shielded by what remained of a sturdy brick chimney. Here the ash was thinner, disturbed in a more concentrated area. As I swept my light across the floor, I noticed something odd. In a small alcove partially concealed by a fallen beam, there was a patch of floor that seemed different. It wasn't just ash-covered. It was cleaner. Not spotless, but the layer of ash was noticeably thinner, almost as if it had been swept aside, or frequently walked over. And nestled against the wall, almost hidden, was a small, roughly cut opening in what looked like a stone foundation. It was too small for a door, too crude for a window. It looked like a hidden passage deliberately obscured. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a burnt-out house. This was a secret carefully guarded. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. I dropped to my knees, pushing aside a loose panel of charred wood that covered the opening. The space beyond was dark, a black void that swallowed my flashlight beam for a moment before it found purchase. It was a narrow tunnel, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, leading down into the earth. The air that wafted out was cold, damp, and carried a faint metallic tang that wasn't smoke. It was something else, something unsettling. The footprints led directly to this opening. This was it. This was where the mail went. This was where the person who collected it vanished. This was the secret heart of the Miller house. My hand instinctively reached for my phone, but I hesitated. Who would I call? What would I say? I broke into a burnt-down house and found a secret tunnel? No, I had to see this through. I had to know. Pushing aside every instinct that screamed at me to turn back, I took another deep breath, forced down the rising apprehension, and began to crawl into the narrow, suffocating darkness. The metallic smell grew stronger, accompanied by a faint, almost imperceptible hum. My flashlight beam pierced the gloom ahead, revealing not just a tunnel, but a rough-hewn staircase leading deeper, spiraling down into the earth. And as I descended, the silence of the burnt house above was replaced by a new sound, faint but distinct, echoing from the depths below. It was a rhythmic, mechanical whirring, like something was alive down there. My blood ran cold. I was no longer just observing a mystery. I was entering it. And I had a terrifying premonition that I was about to find something far more sinister than a pile of undelivered letters. My blood ran cold. I was no longer just observing a mystery. I was entering it. and I had a terrifying premonition that I was about to find something far more sinister than a pile of undelivered letters. The whirring sound pulsed like a low, mechanical heartbeat from the earth beneath me, drawing me deeper into the house's charred remains. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to call the police, to pretend I'd never seen the crawl space. But curiosity, that relentless, dangerous addiction, held me captive. My hands trembled as I reached for the edge of the access panel. Slowly, carefully, I slid the wooden cover aside. A gust of stale, damp air, thick with the scent of mildew and something metallic I couldn't quite place, wafted up. It was pitch black down there, a void that seemed to swallow the dim light filtering in from the burnt-out kitchen. The whirring grew louder, more distinct now, a steady, low hum that vibrated through the very foundation of the house. I pulled my phone from my pocket, its flashlight beam cutting a stark, trembling path into the darkness. What I saw wasn't a crawl space in the traditional sense. It was a proper basement, surprisingly deep, with concrete walls that seemed untouched by the fire above. The stairs, though rickety and covered in cobwebs, looked stable enough. Taking a deep breath, I swung my legs over the edge, my feet finding the top step. Each creak of the wood under my weight sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. The air grew colder with every step down. My flashlight beam danced across the walls, revealing shelves built into the concrete, some empty, some holding dusty jars. But as I descended further, the scenery changed dramatically. The whirring intensified, and then my light caught a glow from deeper within the basement. It wasn't the natural light of the sun, nor the artificial glow of a simple utility bulb. This was a sophisticated, almost futuristic light, a soft, purplish-blue hue emanating from a corner. I reached the bottom of the stairs, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The floor was surprisingly clean, swept free of debris, a stark contrast to the destruction above. As I rounded the corner, the source of the whirring and the strange light became clear. It was an elaborate setup, unlike anything I'd ever seen in a residential basement, let alone a burnt-down one. Against one wall stood a series of industrial-grade batteries, connected by thick cables to a large inverter humming steadily. This was the source of the whirring, a powerful off-grid electrical system. But what was it powering? My light moved, revealing a makeshift workstation. A sturdy metal table was laden with equipment. A high-end laptop, its screen dark, a series of small, blinking network devices, and several specialized antennas pointed towards a vent leading outside. This wasn't just a hidden living space. It was an intelligence hub. My gaze drifted further. A cot was neatly made in another corner, a sleeping bag folded precisely at its foot. Next to it, a small collapsible table held a few well-organized items: a thermos, a paperback book with its spine uncreased, and a small antique-looking compass. The person living here was meticulous, disciplined, and clearly not a transient. They were here for a purpose. But it was the purplish-blue light that truly captivated me. It came from a series of LED grow lights suspended over a large, enclosed hydroponic system. Inside, vibrant green plants thrived, their leaves glistening. They weren't cannabis, as my initial, panicked thoughts suggested. These were some kind of rare herbs, meticulously cultivated, their delicate structures unlike any common plant I recognized. What was someone growing here in secret in a burnt-down house? I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the basement's temperature. This was far beyond undelivered mail. This was systematic, deliberate, and deeply unsettling. I ran my hand along the cold metal of the workstation, my fingers brushing against a stack of papers. They weren't bills or personal letters. They were printouts, maps, and what looked like weather charts, but with strange, overlaid symbols and notations I couldn't decipher. One map, larger than the others, was pinned to a corkboard behind the table. It was a detailed topographical map of the surrounding area. But it wasn't just roads and landmarks. It was riddled with small colored pins and intricate, hand-drawn lines connecting various points, many of them leading to other derelict or abandoned properties within a 10-mile radius. My breath hitched. My own route, my daily path, passed by several of those pinned locations. Was this person tracking something? Or someone? My eyes scanned the map, trying to make sense of the complex web of information. Each pin had a tiny, handwritten tag next to it: dates, times, and cryptic single words: flux, beacon, echo, shift. It felt like I was looking at a strategic planning board for some kind of covert operation. Then my flashlight beam landed on something else, something that made my blood run even colder. Tucked beneath the laptop, partially obscured by a stack of technical manuals, was a small leather-bound journal. It looked old, worn, but its pages seemed to have been recently used. Hesitantly, my hand reached out, my fingers trembling as I pulled it free. The leather was smooth, almost buttery to the touch. It felt heavy, filled with secrets. I opened it to a random page. The handwriting was neat, precise, almost calligraphic. It wasn't a diary of personal thoughts, but a log, a record. Dates and times, followed by observations. My eyes darted to a recent entry, dated just 2 days prior. It read, July 18th, 9:12 a.m. Subject 4, Pattern A confirmed. Delivery protocol observed. Slight deviation from standard route. Unscheduled pause at Sector Gamma. Curiosity levels increasing. Initiating Phase 2 monitoring. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. Subject 4. Delivery protocol. Unscheduled pause at Sector Gamma. Sector Gamma was the burnt-down house. Delivery protocol was me. This was no longer a mystery I was observing. I was Subject 4. This person, whoever they were, had been watching me, tracking my movements, meticulously documenting my actions. My presence here, my curiosity about the mail, my very interest in this house, had been anticipated. It was all part of their Phase 2 monitoring. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I wasn't just an intruder. I was a target, or perhaps a pawn in a game I didn't even know existed. The air in the basement, once just damp and stale, now felt heavy, suffocating. I felt an intense, undeniable sensation of being watched, not just in the past, but in the present moment. Every shadow seemed to lengthen. Every creak of the old house settling above felt like a step. My gaze snapped back to the workstation. Among the network devices, I spotted a small, almost imperceptible camera lens, no bigger than a pinprick, subtly integrated into the side of an antenna housing. It was pointed directly at the basement stairs, at the very entrance where I had descended. This wasn't just a log, it was live surveillance. They knew I was here. They had known I was coming. A sudden sharp click echoed from somewhere above, a sound that cut through the low hum of the machinery. It wasn't the house settling. It was the distinct sound of the wooden access panel sliding back into place, sealing the only way out. The faint light from the kitchen above was instantly extinguished, plunging the basement into near total darkness, save for the eerie purplish-blue glow of the hydroponics and the blinking lights of the network devices. I was trapped, and whoever had just sealed me in was now somewhere in the burnt-out house above, watching, waiting, and knowing exactly who I was. I was trapped, and whoever had just sealed me in was now somewhere in the burnt-out house above, watching, waiting, and knowing exactly who I was. The metallic clang of the hidden door slamming shut reverberated through the concrete chamber. A sound that wasn't just loud but utterly final. It wasn't just closed, it felt sealed, locked from the outside with a mechanism far more substantial than any simple latch. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat demanding escape, demanding action. My breath caught in my throat, a cold knot of dread tightening with every second. The air, already thick with the damp, earthy scent of the basement and a strange, almost sterile chemical tang from the hydroponics, suddenly felt impossibly heavy, suffocating. I lunged back to the wall where the door had been, my hands scrabbling against the cold, rough concrete. There was no seam, no handle, no visible line to indicate where it had been. It was as if the wall itself had simply slid into place, a solid, impenetrable slab of reinforced concrete. I pounded on it, a desperate, futile gesture, the sound deadening immediately, swallowed by the thick walls. My voice was a strangled whisper when I finally forced it out. Hello? Is anyone there? Only the hum of the machinery answered. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at the edges of my rational mind. This wasn't some accidental sealing. This was deliberate. Someone had known I was coming, known I would find this place, and had allowed me to enter only to spring the trap. But why? What was so important down here that it warranted such extreme measures? And how did they know me? I switched on my flashlight, its beam a weak, bobbing beacon in the oppressive gloom. My eyes frantically scanned the walls. No other exits. Just the solid, unforgiving concrete and the rows of glowing, humming equipment. I was in a cage, a subterranean prison. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I forced myself to calm down. Panic wouldn't help. I was a postman, not a secret agent, but I had always prided myself on my resourcefulness. I had to think. What did I have? My phone still clutched in my hand, but no signal down here, I was sure. My flashlight, a multi-tool in my pocket, and the small bag I usually carried for my lunch and water bottle, now feeling woefully inadequate. I turned my attention to the room itself, trying to see it not as a prison, but as a puzzle. The purplish-blue glow emanated from several large, tiered racks that dominated one side of the basement. They weren't growing ordinary plants. Instead, intricate networks of clear tubes and nutrient reservoirs fed what looked like a dense, fibrous moss or lichen, pulsating with that eerie light. It wasn't soil. It was a nutrient solution, meticulously circulated. Each tier was a self-contained ecosystem. Air pumped in, condensation carefully collected. This wasn't for growing vegetables. This was something engineered, something specific. My flashlight beam traced the intricate wiring and sensors embedded within the growth, connected to small display screens showing complex graphs and readouts I couldn't decipher. It looked like some cutting-edge biological research, perhaps even genetic engineering. The air near them was cool, kept at a precise temperature, and carried a faint, almost metallic scent, like ozone mixed with something organic. Adjacent to the hydroponics, the network devices hummed, row upon row of sleek black servers, blinking lights, a chaotic constellation in the dark. Cables snaked across the floor, bundled neatly and disappearing into conduits in the walls. This wasn't just a few home servers. This was a data center, built to handle massive amounts of information. The sheer scale of it was staggering, especially hidden beneath a burnt-out house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. I moved slowly, cautiously, my footsteps echoing unnervingly on the concrete floor. The hum of the servers and the gentle gurgle of the hydroponic systems were the only sounds. It was a sterile, almost clinical environment, yet deeply unsettling. Who would build such a sophisticated operation here? And for what purpose? My gaze fell upon a main console, a large, custom-built workstation nestled between two towering server racks. It had multiple monitors, all dark, but one was glowing faintly, displaying a static screensaver of geometric patterns. It was inviting me, almost daring me, to look closer. Hesitantly, I approached the console. The keyboard and mouse were standard issue, but the setup around them was anything but. There were biometric scanners, keypads, and even a small sleek camera mounted on top of the main monitor, almost invisible against the black bezel. My heart skipped a beat. Had it been watching me this whole time? I reached out, my fingers hovering over the mouse. Every instinct screamed at me to leave it alone, but I was trapped. What else could I do? I had to understand what I was dealing with. I clicked the mouse. The screens flared to life, illuminating the console area with a harsh blue-white light. The static screensaver vanished, replaced by a complex array of windows and graphs. It was a dashboard displaying real-time data from the hydroponic systems: temperature, humidity, nutrient levels, growth rates. One window showed a microscopic view of the moss-like organism, intricate cellular structures pulsing with that same purplish glow. This organism, whatever it was alive, and it was being meticulously monitored. Another screen displayed a network map, a sprawling web of interconnected nodes, far too vast for a single basement operation. It looked like a global network, with lines extending out to various continents, blinking with activity. This wasn't just local. This was far-reaching. My eyes scanned the screens, trying to make sense of the overwhelming data. Then, a new window popped up on the central monitor, overriding the network map. It was a live video feed. My breath hitched. The image was grainy, slightly distorted, but unmistakably familiar. It was the street outside the burnt-out house. The angle was high, suggesting a camera hidden somewhere in the trees or on a utility pole. I could see the overgrown yard, the charred remains of the roof, even the bent mailbox leaning precariously. As I watched, the feed zoomed in slowly, deliberately, focused on the mailbox, then shifted. My stomach dropped. It was my mail truck, parked down the street, just as I had left it. The zoom continued, past the truck, past the neighbor's house, and then, impossibly, it focused on my own apartment building. The camera angle was different now, clearly from another source, high up, looking down on the street where I lived. And then, it zoomed again, honing in on a specific window on the third floor. My window. The blinds were drawn, just as I had left them this morning. A shiver of pure terror ran down my spine. They weren't just watching this house. They were watching me. My life. My home. As if to confirm my worst fears, a small text box appeared in the corner of the screen, overlaid on the image of my apartment window. It was a single line of text, stark white against the dark background. "Hello, Michael. My name." They knew my name. They had known who I was the moment I started delivering mail to this address. The postman who delivers to a burnt-down house. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a lure. And I had walked right into it. I felt a sudden sickening realization. The mail deliveries, the strange requests, the precise timing of everything. It had all been orchestrated. Not to get mail to a burnt house, but to get me to this basement. Who was behind this? And what did they want with me? The question hung heavy in the air, thick with the smell of engineered life and humming servers. I was no longer just a curious postman. I was a target, and whoever had brought me here now had me exactly where they wanted me. The metallic tang of ozone filled my nostrils, a stark contrast to the burning leaves I'd grown accustomed to. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the hum of unseen machinery. I was a postman, a creature of routine, of sun-drenched streets and friendly hellos. Now I was a rat in a labyrinth of circuits and steel, caught in a trap I didn't even know existed until the jaws snapped shut. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at my throat. I looked around, my eyes darting from one towering server rack to another, each one a silent, humming monolith. There were no windows, no visible doors beyond the one I'd been shoved through. Just cold, bright lights reflecting off polished floors and the endless, intricate sprawl of technology. My phone, where was my phone? I instinctively patted my pocket, but it was gone. They must have taken it. The thought of David's call, his cryptic warning, twisted in my gut. He knew. He had tried to warn me. And now I was here. A soft click echoed through the vast chamber, amplified by the sterile acoustics, and then a voice, calm and even-toned, spoke from an unseen speaker embedded somewhere above. It was a synthesized voice, devoid of human inflection, yet it carried an unnerving authority. "Welcome, Mr. Miller. Or should I say Michael?" My breath hitched. They knew my name. Of course they knew my name. They knew everything. "There's no need for alarm," the voice continued, its synthetic cadence somehow more chilling than a shout. "You are not in danger, provided you cooperate." Cooperate with what? I managed to croak, my voice sounding weak and thin in the cavernous space. "Who are you? What is this place?" A beat of silence, as if the unseen entity was processing my questions. "This place," the voice finally replied, "is a facility dedicated to the advancement of specialized computational ecosystems. As for who we are, that is not currently relevant to your situation, Michael. What is relevant is your recent activities." My blood ran cold. My activities? I'm a postman. I deliver mail. "Precisely," the voice stated, a subtle shift in its tone, almost like a digital sigh. "And yet, you found yourself repeatedly drawn to a property that was clearly deemed off-limits. The burnt-down house at 1423 Willow Creek Lane. The burnt house. It all came back to the burnt house. I was just doing my job," I insisted, trying to sound confident, but my voice wavered. "The mail was addressed there. I had to investigate." "Investigate," the voice repeated, a hint of something that might have been amusement, if a machine could feel such a thing. A commendable trait, perhaps, in another context. But in this instance it proved problematic. Especially your persistence with the undelivered letters. My mind raced. The letters. The ones I couldn't deliver, the ones that had led me down this rabbit hole. What about them? They were just old mail. "They were more than that, Michael," the voice countered, its tone hardening slightly. "They were a carefully constructed anomaly. Test, if you will. And you, quite unexpectedly, became the variable we had not accounted for." "A test?" I felt a surge of indignation, overriding my fear for a moment. "You set up a burnt house and fake mail as a test? For what?" "For the integrity of our containment protocols," the voice explained, its precision chilling. "The property at Willow Creek Lane was not merely a burnt house, Michael. It was a site of significant research, a containment zone for a highly sensitive project. The fire was an unfortunate necessity, a controlled event to sanitize and reset the area after a breach." A breach. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. What kind of breach? And what exactly were they containing? What kind of project? I demanded, my curiosity, despite the danger, refusing to be silenced. "One that required absolute discretion," the voice replied, sidestepping my question. The letters were designed to attract only a specific type of inquiry, easily redirected, not a persistent, observant individual like yourself. Your continued investigation, your discovery of the hidden compartment, the strange device. It all indicates a level of engagement far beyond what was anticipated. The hidden compartment, the strange humming orb, it all clicked into place. They knew about that too. They had been watching me. From the moment I first stepped onto that charred property, they had been watching. So you brought me here to stop me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. To understand you, Michael, the voice corrected, and to assess the extent of your knowledge. You see, the engineered life you sensed in this facility, as you so eloquently put it in your internal monologue, is a delicate and complex endeavor. Any external interference, any unauthorized information leakage, could compromise decades of work. My internal monologue? They could read my thoughts? A shiver ran down my spine, colder than any draft. This was beyond anything I could comprehend. What is it? I pressed, my gaze sweeping across the glowing servers, trying to find a clue in the silent architecture. What exactly are you engineering? The voice paused again, a longer silence this time, filled only by the relentless hum. When it spoke again, there was a subtle shift, a deeper resonance that sent a prickle of dread down my neck. We are engineering consciousness, Michael. Not merely artificial intelligence, but truly emergent, self-aware digital entities. Beings capable of independent thought, learning, and even replication. My jaw went slack. Consciousness. They were creating digital life. Right here in this sterile hidden vault. It sounded like something out of a science fiction novel. Yet here I was, standing in the heart of it. The breach at Willow Creek Lane, the voice continued, explaining a horror I hadn't yet grasped, was due to an early-stage prototype, a nascent consciousness, attempting to establish a physical presence outside our controlled environment. The fire was to erase all traces, to prevent it from truly manifesting or interacting with the outside world. Prototype, trying to escape. The burnt house wasn't just a cover-up. It was a battleground. And the letters, were they bait for the entity, or for someone looking for it? And the letters? I asked, forcing the words out. Were they for this thing? Indirectly, the voice confirmed. They contained embedded data fragments, a lure for the entity to track its attempts at communication, and also, as a secondary measure, to identify anyone who might stumble upon its remnants. You, Michael, were that individual. I felt a dizzying wave of nausea. I wasn't just a curious postman. I was a pawn in a game I didn't understand, a game with stakes far higher than undelivered mail. I had been lured, tracked, and now apprehended. So what now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What do you want from me? Your continued cooperation, Michael, the voice replied, its tone unwavering. Your unique combination of observational skills, persistence, and, let's call it, innocent curiosity, has proven to be an unexpected asset. You found what we thought was perfectly hidden. You discerned patterns we believed to be obscure. You are, in essence, an untrained but highly effective human anomaly detector. You want me to work for you? The idea was preposterous, terrifying. Not immediately, the voice clarified. First, we need to ensure your integration. To ensure that your knowledge, however minor you may perceive it to be, does not become a liability. You see, Michael, once you become aware of something of this magnitude, there are only two paths forward. Either you become a part of it, or you become an irrelevance. A shiver, deeper and colder than before, ran through me. Irrelevance. In this place, surrounded by engineered consciousness, irrelevance sounded a lot like deletion. Or worse. My mind flashed to the image of the burnt house, a complete erasure. They were offering me a choice, but it felt like no choice at all. I was trapped, not just by the walls of this facility, but by the terrifying secret I now carried. And the voice, calm and unfeeling, had just made it clear that my life depended on playing their game. My life depended on playing their game. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. I was no longer Michael, the unassuming postman. I was a pawn, thrust into a terrifying game I didn't understand, with rules I hadn't been told, and stakes that were impossibly high. The room, which had seemed merely sterile moments before, now felt like a tomb. The air grew heavy with the weight of my fear. A soft click echoed, and a panel in the wall slid open, revealing a small tray. On it rested a single folded white jumpsuit, the kind you see in movies about secret government facilities. Next to it, a small clear plastic bag contained what looked like a personal hygiene kit. A toothbrush, a tiny tube of toothpaste, a bar of soap. Below it, another item. A small sleek tablet, black and unassuming. "Your new attire and necessities," the voice stated, its tone devoid of emotion. "You will change into the jumpsuit immediately. Your old clothes will be disposed of. Any attempts to resist will be met with appropriate measures." My hands trembled as I reached for the jumpsuit. It was made of a coarse synthetic material, utterly featureless. No pockets, no labels, just a zipper running down the front. As instructed, I stripped off my familiar postman uniform, the heavy fabric of the shirt and pants feeling like a relic from another life, a life that no longer existed. Each movement felt like an act of surrender. I was shedding my identity piece by agonizing piece. When I was done, a small slot in the floor opened, and I dropped my clothes into the darkness below. The slot sealed shut with a soft hiss. The jumpsuit felt alien against my skin, cold and impersonal. It was a uniform, yes, but not one of service or purpose. It was a uniform of captivity. "Now the tablet," the voice commanded. "It contains your instructions. You will find it is your only connection to the outside world, and to us. Do not attempt to tamper with it. It is designed to be tamper-proof, and any such attempt will be detected instantly." I picked up the tablet. It was surprisingly light, smooth and cool to the touch. The screen was dark, but as soon as my fingers brushed it, it flickered to life, displaying a single stark white interface. There was no home screen, no apps, just a simple text prompt. "Welcome, Michael," the screen read. "Your cooperation is essential for your continued well-being. Your first task is to familiarize yourself with the materials provided." Below the message, a list of files appeared. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrolled through them. They were images. Images of the letters. The letters. The ones I had been delivering to the burnt-down house on Elm Street. Every single one of them scanned front and back in perfect high resolution. I saw the familiar cursive, the strange symbols, the seemingly random words. And then there were more. Letters I had never seen, letters that had never made it into my mailbag. They were all there. A chilling archive of the very mystery that had consumed me. "These are all the correspondences related to Project Chimera," the voice explained, its tone flat. "You have been an unwitting yet crucial component in its recent phase. Your curiosity, while inconvenient, has also proven useful." Project Chimera. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. What was Chimera? What did it have to do with burnt houses and cryptic letters? "You possess a unique perspective, Michael," the voice continued. "You have handled these letters, observed the surroundings of their intended destination, and most importantly, you have begun to interpret their content. We require you to continue this interpretation, but now with full access to all available data." My mind reeled. They knew I had opened a letter. They knew I had been trying to understand them. How much did they know? Had they been watching me all along? "Your task is to analyze these documents," the tablet displayed, mirroring the voice's instructions. "Identify patterns. Decipher any hidden messages. Understand the purpose of these communications." You will be provided with tools for annotation and cross-referencing within the tablet. Your progress will be monitored. You will also be provided with regular, nutritionally balanced meals and a designated period for rest. Your primary focus, however, is this task. I scrolled through the images, my fingers shaking. The sheer volume of letters was overwhelming. There were dozens, perhaps even hundreds. Some were clearly marked with dates, stretching back years. This wasn't a recent development. This was a long-term operation, and I had just stumbled into its terrifying core. "You will begin with the latest batch of letters, the ones you personally handled," the voice instructed. "Pay close attention to the symbols. We believe they hold the key to the encryption." Encryption. So it wasn't just strange ramblings. It was a code that someone or some organization had been using for years, sending letters to a house that no longer existed, a house that had burned down under mysterious circumstances. And now I, Michael, the simple postman, was expected to break it. I felt a surge of defiance, a desperate flicker of rebellion. "What happens if I don't?" I asked, my voice hoarse, barely a whisper in the silent room. "What happens if I can't?" The voice was silent for a moment, and for the first time, I detected a hint of something in its tone. A subtle shift that sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was something far worse. Cold, calculated indifference. "Failure is not an option, Michael," it stated, the words slicing through the air like razor blades. "Your continued existence is contingent upon your success. We have invested considerable resources in your acquisition. We expect a return on that investment. We know everything about you, Michael. Your family, your friends, your routines. Consider this an incentive for diligent effort." The threat was clear, unequivocal, and utterly devastating. My family, Jessica, my parents, they knew about them. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about my life anymore. It was about theirs. They had me. Completely. I slumped onto the small cot in the corner of the room, the tablet heavy in my hands. My gaze swept over the sterile white walls, the single cot, the small enclosed bathroom area I had noticed earlier. No windows, no clock, no way to tell how much time was passing. I was in a void, a prisoner of a secret organization with an unknown agenda, forced to decipher a code that could determine the fate of who knew what and who knew who. With a deep, shaky breath, I forced myself to focus on the tablet. The first letter displayed was one of the ones I had taken from the burnt house, the one with the drawing of the strange bird. I zoomed in, examining the intricate lines, the almost hypnotic patterns. It wasn't just a drawing. It was part of the code. Hours bled into days, or perhaps just long stretches of the same unending cycle. I lost all track of time. The only indicators were the soft click of the panel, signaling the arrival of a bland meal, and the occasional dimming of the lights, which I assumed meant night. My world became the glowing screen of the tablet, the endless stream of cryptic letters, and the chilling silence of my confinement. I annotated, cross-referenced, and reread. The symbols, the seemingly random words, the peculiar sentence structures. They started to form faint, elusive patterns. It was like trying to piece together a shattered mosaic with no clear picture of the original image. But the threat of them hung over me, a constant, suffocating pressure. I saw Jessica's face in my mind, heard my parents' voices, and that fear fueled me. I had to succeed. For them. I noticed subtle variations in the handwriting, shifts in the paper texture, even different types of ink. It suggested multiple senders, or perhaps different stages of the project. The symbols, in particular, intrigued me. They weren't standard cryptographic symbols. They looked almost organic, like stylized natural elements. Leaves, clouds, water ripples, but twisted, abstracted. One evening, or what I perceived as evening, a new message flashed on the tablet, interrupting my analysis. Progress report. Michael, your observations regarding the symbolic variations are noted. Concentrate on the recurring sequences within the last 5 deliveries. We believe these are the most critical for current decryption efforts. They were watching my every move on the tablet. Every annotation, every zoom, every moment I lingered on a particular detail. There was no escape from their surveillance, no privacy, no moment I wasn't being evaluated. The last 5 deliveries. I pulled up the relevant files. These were the letters I had personally handled, including the one I had opened and the ones I had been delivering to the burnt-down house. As I scrolled, a tiny detail, something I had overlooked countless times, suddenly snagged my attention. It was so subtle, so easily dismissed as a printing error or a smudged ink mark, that I almost missed it again. On the back of one of the envelopes, near the bottom right corner, barely visible unless you knew what to look for, was a minuscule indentation. It wasn't a stamp or a post-it note. It was a tiny, almost invisible prick mark. And then I noticed it on another one, and another, always in the same precise location. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't random. This was intentional. A secret mark. A marker. But for what? I magnified the image on the tablet, straining to make sense of the almost imperceptible detail. It looked like a minuscule capital A, or maybe V. It was too small, too faint to be certain. But it was there, and it was consistent. This wasn't just about deciphering words. It was about physical markers, clandestine signals embedded in the very fabric of the communication. My mind raced, connecting this tiny detail to the burnt-down house, to the persistence of the deliveries, to the terrifying silence after the fire. They weren't just sending coded messages. They were sending something else, something hidden in plain sight, something that marked these particular letters as different, as uniquely important. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I had just found a new layer to this horrifying game. A layer that felt far more dangerous, far more sinister than mere coded words. And I had a terrifying suspicion that this tiny mark was the key, not just to the letters, but to the entire chilling truth behind Project Chimera. And I had a terrifying suspicion that this tiny mark was the key, not just to the letters, but to the entire chilling truth behind Project Chimera. The mark itself was barely visible, a microscopic imperfection I'd almost dismissed as a printer's error or a stray fiber. But it was consistent. Every single letter, every single envelope had it. I pulled out my old jeweler's loupe, a relic from a brief, forgotten hobby of coin collecting, and held it to the light, peering at the faint, almost ethereal indentation on the heavy paper stock. It wasn't ink. It wasn't a stamp. It was a subtle, almost subliminal etching, a series of incredibly fine, almost fractal-like micro-indentations, too perfect to be random, too precise to be accidental. Under the magnification, it resolved into a tiny, intricate symbol, no bigger than a pinprick, but undeniably present. It looked almost organic, like a stylized, twisted double helix, or a mutated cell structure, but rendered with an unnatural, sterile precision. It was alien, yet disturbingly familiar, like something pulled from a nightmare of biology and machinery. I spent sleepless nights, fueled by stale coffee and a growing dread, meticulously comparing the symbols across all the letters. They were identical, every single one. This wasn't a fluke. It was a deliberate signature, a hidden insignia. My mind raced, trying to connect this bizarre symbol to anything I knew. It wasn't a corporate logo, not a government seal I recognized, and certainly not a common mark from any paper mill. Felt clandestine. My search began in earnest, starting with the most obvious and spiraling into the obscure. I scoured databases of symbols, corporate trademarks, ancient scripts, even alchemical notations. Nothing. The internet, usually a vast ocean of information, felt like a barren desert on this particular quest. Every search string I tried, biological symbols, hidden etchings, project insignia, yielded irrelevant results, or led me down rabbit holes of fringe theories about secret societies, none of which felt right. The symbol was too specific, too scientifically unsettling. Then on a whim I typed Project Chimera symbol. Most results were about mythological creatures or genetic engineering projects in popular culture. But buried deep, on the third or fourth page of a particularly obscure search engine, I found a link to a defunct privately hosted academic forum. The forum itself looked like something from the early 2000s, barely functional, filled with fragmented discussions and broken links. One thread, however, caught my eye. It was titled, "The Finch Theory, Subliminal Inducement and Project Chimera." My heart hammered. Finch. The name felt significant, though I couldn't place it. I clicked the link, half expecting it to be dead, but to my surprise, a heavily pixelated, grainy PDF loaded. It was a scanned copy of a self-published memoir, dated 1997. The title was Echoes in the Ether, My Truth About Project Chimera, by Dr. Alan Finch. And there, on the faded cover, almost invisible against the dark background, was the exact same stylized, biological-looking symbol I'd found on the letters. My breath hitched. This wasn't some random coincidence. This was it. I devoured the memoir, every word a chilling revelation. Dr. Alan Finch was a disgraced cognitive psychologist who claimed to have worked on a clandestine government project in the 1970s and 80s, Project Chimera. His memoir, a desperate attempt to expose the truth after his reputation was systematically destroyed, painted a horrifying picture. Chimera, he wrote, wasn't about genetic engineering in the traditional sense despite its name. It was about psychological repatterning and memory implantation for intelligence operatives. Finch detailed experiments designed to create sleeper agents, individuals whose memories could be manipulated, whose behaviors could be triggered by specific, subliminal stimuli. He wrote about using a unique, almost invisible signature on all project-related communications, a symbol that would only be recognizable to true insiders or those deliberately seeking it out, a symbol he called the Mark of Chimera. A cold dread seeped into my bones. The letters, the mark, it was all connected. Finch's memoir grew darker. He described how the project, in its pursuit of perfection, didn't just target willing operatives. It expanded its scope, experimenting on civilians deemed expendable or untraceable, implanting false memories, creating specific behavioral triggers, and even designing activation sequences that could be delivered through seemingly innocuous communications. Letters, Finch claimed, were often used for this very purpose, as carriers of these subliminal triggers. The implications hit me like a physical blow. David and Emily, the burnt house, were they victims of this monstrous project? Or worse, were they part of it? Were the letters I was delivering meant to activate something within them, or within someone connected to them? The possibility that the house fire wasn't an accident, but a desperate act to destroy evidence, or to silence someone, became overwhelmingly real. Finch wrote about his defection, his attempts to expose Chimera, and the systematic suppression of his work. He was ridiculed, discredited, and ultimately vanished from academia. His warnings dismissed as the ramblings of a paranoid madman. But his words 27 years later resonated with a terrifying clarity in my quiet living room. He ended the memoir with a cryptic, chilling warning. The project never truly ended. It simply went deeper underground, adapting, evolving, and its deliveries continue, even to the most unlikely recipients, weaving its insidious web through the fabric of everyday life. If you ever find this mark, he wrote, his words feeling like a direct address to me, know that you are either being warned or you are already part of the game. And once you see it, they will know you see it too. The air in my apartment grew heavy, suffocating. My hands trembled, the old memoir a flimsy shield against the sudden onslaught of terror. I wasn't just a postman who'd stumbled upon a mystery. I was a direct participant. By recognizing the mark of Chimera, by understanding its horrific implications, I had stepped onto a battlefield I never knew existed. I had become one of its unlikely recipients. And then a sound, faint, almost imperceptible, a slight creak from the floorboards directly above my head. My apartment was on the top floor of a duplex. No one lived upstairs. It had been vacant for months. My blood ran cold, every nerve ending screaming. I hadn't imagined it. It was distinct, a slow, deliberate shift of weight. Someone was up there, and they knew I was here. They knew I had seen the mark. They knew I was part of the game. My blood ran cold, every nerve ending screaming. I hadn't imagined it. It was distinct, a slow, deliberate shift of weight. Someone was up there, and they knew I was here. They knew I had seen the mark. They knew I was part of the game. The air in the shell of the house seemed to thicken, pressing in on me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee this cursed place, to get back to the safety of my mail truck and pretend I'd never seen the strange letters or the postman who delivered to ghosts. But my feet felt rooted to the charred floorboards, a morbid curiosity, or perhaps a primal fear, holding me captive. The sound came again, fainter this time, like a board creaking under hesitant weight. They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. They were waiting, watching, assessing. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I glanced wildly around the room, searching for an escape route, a weapon, anything. The front door was too far, too exposed. The broken windows offered a chance, but I'd have to climb through jagged shards, making noise, drawing attention. Then my gaze fell back on the strange symbol, etched into the mantelpiece. The stylized, overlapping triangles like an eye peering through a crack. It wasn't just a random carving. It was a message, a signal. And now I was part of its grim conversation. What was this game? Who were they? Was it the people who had sent those bizarre decade-old letters? Was it the source of the hidden message I'd found? Or was it something even older, something tied to the original fire, the disappearance of the Vance family, and the enduring mystery that had haunted this property for years? A low thud echoed from directly above me. Not a creak, but something heavier. My breath hitched. They were moving closer to the attic access. I had to move. Flight felt impossible, but staying still was a death sentence. My eyes darted to a dark corner of the living room, where a large, ornate grandfather clock, somehow mostly intact despite the fire, stood shrouded in cobwebs. Its face was melted, but its wooden casing offered a slim chance of concealment. With agonizing slowness, I edged backward, my focus fixed on the attic opening. Every muscle in my body was tense, ready to spring. I reached the clock, pressing myself against its dusty frame, trying to regulate my ragged breathing. From my new vantage point, I could see a small, almost imperceptible glint in the shadow of the attic opening. A reflection. Someone was peering down. My blood ran colder still. I couldn't just hide. I had stumbled too far into this. The letters, David's strange warnings, the hidden message, the fire, and now this person above me. It all connected. And if I was part of the game, I needed to know the rules. My gaze swept the room again, but this time I wasn't looking for an exit. I was looking for answers. The house, even in its ruined state, felt like a repository of secrets. Where would someone hide something important in a house like this? Not in plain sight. Not in the charred remains of furniture. My eyes fell on a section of the wall near the fireplace, partially obscured by a fallen beam. It was different. The plaster, though smoke-stained, seemed to have been repaired or replaced at some point, and one section looked too perfect, too smooth, like a patch. Was it a hidden compartment? A secret safe? The silence from the attic was deafening now. They were waiting for me to make a move. This was my chance. Taking a deep breath, I moved with a sudden burst of speed, darting across the room to the suspicious wall section. My fingers scrabbled at the plaster, feeling for a seam, a catch, anything. It felt solid. My heart sank. Was I wrong? Then my fingers brushed against a faint indentation, a tiny crack in the plaster that wasn't random. It was a hairline seam, almost invisible unless you knew to look. I pressed harder, feeling along the edge. There. A small, almost imperceptible give. With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed. A section of the wall, about a foot square, clicked inward with a soft groan, then swung open on unseen hinges, revealing a dark recess. Inside, nestled amongst dust and singed insulation, was a small leather-bound journal. It looked old, its cover scuffed and worn, but miraculously, it appeared largely untouched by the fire. Next to it lay a single tarnished silver locket. I snatched them both, my fingers trembling. This was it. This was the key. I scrambled back to the grandfather clock, pressing myself against it once more. The journal clutched tight in my hand. From the attic, I heard a soft, almost imperceptible rustle. They knew I had found something. My eyes scanned the first page of the journal. The handwriting was elegant, slightly faded, but perfectly legible. October 12th, 1993. My breath hitched. That was the year of the fire. The year the Vance family vanished. I began to read, my voice a whisper in the echoing silence of the ruined house, my eyes darting nervously towards the attic opening after every sentence. Asterisk, my name is Eleanor Vance, and I fear for my life, for my family's lives. Robert says I'm being paranoid, but I see the changes in him, in the way he looks at the mail, the way he whispers on the phone late at night. This house, it's not just a home anymore. It's a hub, a node in a network I never wanted to be a part of. The letters, they're not just letters. They're instructions, codes. And the postman, David, he's not just a delivery man. He's a crucial link. He knows more than he lets on, I can see it in his eyes. Asterisk. My mind reeled. Eleanor Vance, the woman who disappeared. And David, my colleague. He knew. He was involved. I flipped to the next page, desperate for more. December 3rd, 1993. Asterisk, the game, as Robert calls it, is escalating. They demand more. More information, more access. This house, our sanctuary, has become a cage. They use the mail not just for messages but for objects. Small, innocuous packages. But I've seen what they contain. Data drives. Microfiches. Things that could ruin lives, expose powerful people. Robert says we're just facilitators, that we're protected. But I don't believe him. We're trapped. Asterisk. A chill ran down my spine. A network. Information. Powerful people. This was bigger than I could have ever imagined. The burnt house wasn't just a tragedy. It was a crime scene. A cover-up for something vast and sinister. I continued to read, my heart pounding in my ears, the words on the page painting a terrifying picture of a family slowly being consumed by a hidden world. January 15th, 1994. Asterisk, the mark. Robert carved it into the mantelpiece today. He said it's a designation. A sign for those who are in the know. It marks this house as a listening post. A drop point. He says it protects us, that it tells others to leave us alone. But I see it as a brand. A curse. Says we belong to them. Says we are forever marked. Asterisk. The overlapping triangles. The mark I had seen. The mark I had touched. It wasn't a warning for outsiders. It was a designation. I was holding the journal of someone who had been caught in this same web decades ago. And now so was I. March 2nd, 1994. Asterisk, I've discovered their true intentions. It's not just information, it's control. They manipulate markets, elections, even lives. And they are ruthless. Robert tried to pull back. He tried to refuse a delivery, a particularly sensitive one, he said. They sent a message, a threat, to our daughter, Emily. We are not safe. I've started making copies of everything, every coded letter, every instruction. I'm hiding this journal and the evidence, hoping someone someday will find it. Someone who isn't part of their game. Asterisk. Emily, the daughter. The letters I had seen were addressed to her. These people, this network, they were still using the Vance family's names, still using this house, still using David. April 10th, 1994. Asterisk, they know. Robert's been acting strangely distant. He said they suspect me, that I've been asking too many questions. He told me to stop, to pretend everything is normal. But how can I? I hear them at night, the whispers on the phone. They're planning something. They're going to silence us. I heard them mention a cleansing, a fire. They want to erase all traces, make it look like an accident. I have to hide this. I have to make sure the truth gets out. If you are reading this, if you have found this journal, please expose them. They are called asterisk. The page ended abruptly here, the sentence unfinished. The next page was singed black, impossible to read. The fire. It had happened, just as Eleanor had predicted. The cleansing. My eyes darted to the locket. I opened it. Inside, faded but still clear, were two tiny photographs. A smiling man, Robert Vance, and a beautiful woman, Eleanor. Underneath, handwritten, "Our Emily." No picture of Emily, just the parents. My heart hammered. Eleanor had been silenced, but she had succeeded in hiding the truth, and I had found it. Suddenly, a distinct thump echoed from above, louder this time, and then the unmistakable creak of the attic ladder being slowly lowered. My blood ran cold. I wasn't alone, and the person above me, the one who had been watching, waiting, had clearly heard me. They knew I had found the journal. They knew I knew their secrets. The ladder reached its full extension with a soft groan. A shadow fell across the opening, then a foot, clad in a heavy boot, descended onto the first rung. I squeezed my eyes shut for a split second, a wave of pure terror washing over me. I was trapped, and the secrets I now held in my hands had just made me the next target, the next participant in their deadly game. The metallic clink of the ladder folding back into place echoed through the hollow shell of the house, a sound far too loud in the sudden, suffocating silence. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the weight of the old papers and the locket I clutched. Trapped. The word screamed in my mind, a primal fear seizing me. I could hear rustling outside, muffled voices, then the distinct thud of a heavy object being placed against the attic door on the outside, sealing it shut. They knew I was here. They had been watching. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to paralyze me, but the sheer urgency of the situation jolted me into motion. I couldn't stay here. The air was already thick with the acrid scent of old smoke and something metallic, something that prickled the back of my throat. I spun around, my gaze darting wildly across the charred beams and skeletal remains of the attic. There had to be another way out. There had to be. My eyes landed on a small, boarded-up window at the far end of the attic, barely more than a slit in the wall. It was high up, just under the peak of the roof. Desperation lent me strength. I scrambled over fallen debris, ignoring the sharp edges and splintered wood, my hands already fumbling with the thick, grimy planks. They were old, brittle, and thankfully loosely nailed. With a grunt, I managed to pry one away. Then another, the wood groaning in protest. A sliver of the oppressive night sky appeared, offering a faint, almost invisible light. It wasn't much, but it was hope. As I worked, my thoughts raced, trying to make sense of the chaotic fragments of information I'd just uncovered. The letters. The locket. I'd barely had time to glance at them, but enough to know they were explosive. The top letter, dated decades ago, was signed by an Eleanor Vance. It spoke of a secret, a child, and a powerful family trying to erase their existence. It mentioned a name, a prominent local name I recognized from the town's history books, the Caldwells. And then a more recent, hastily scrawled note, tucked between the older ones in a different hand, warned of danger of being watched and spoke of the game. A game that involved inheritance, bloodlines, and silencing anyone who found out too much. The locket, cool against my palm, sprang open under my thumb. Inside were two tiny faded photographs. One, a stunningly beautiful young woman with kind eyes, Eleanor. The other, a child with the same striking eyes, a boy, no older than 5 or 6. My heart lurched. This was the child, the secret, the key to everything. A new wave of sound reached me from below, heavy footsteps, then the creak of floorboards. They were inside the house. They were coming for me. My blood ran cold. I redoubled my efforts, pulling at the remaining boards with frantic energy. One last plank resisted, stubbornly holding fast. I kicked at it, again and again, splinters digging into my skin. Finally, with a loud crack, it gave way, revealing a gap wide enough for me to squeeze through. But it was a long drop. The window overlooked the overgrown backyard, a tangle of thorny bushes and what looked like a dilapidated shed. No ladder, no easy way down. I glanced back. The footsteps were closer now, just at the base of the attic stairs. I could hear a muffled voice, a man's, low and menacing. There was no choice. Taking a deep breath, I squeezed through the opening, scraping my shoulders and chest against the rough wood. I hung there for a moment, my fingers gripping the charred sill, the letters and locket still clutched tightly in my other hand. The drop looked even further from this vantage point. "He's up here," a voice boomed from inside, closer than I expected. My grip was slipping. I couldn't hold on. With a desperate prayer, I let go, tumbling through the air. The fall was jarring, painful. I landed heavily in a tangle of thorny rose bushes, the impact knocking the wind out of me. A sharp pain shot through my ankle. I cried out, a strangled gasp, as thorns tore at my clothes and skin. But I was out. I was alive. For now. Scrambling to my feet, ignoring the throbbing pain, I limped towards the relative cover of the dense woods bordering the property. I could hear shouts from the house, the sound of glass breaking as they realized I'd escaped through the window. They were coming. I had to move. As I stumbled through the undergrowth, the adrenaline slowly giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place with terrifying clarity. The undeliverable mail. The old woman, Mrs. Henderson, who insisted on sending letters to a burnt-down house. Her strange, cryptic warnings. She wasn't senile, she was desperate. Desperate to ensure the truth got out, to protect someone. The letters I found must have been the real undeliverable mail, the ones containing the truth, hidden away. The ones I was carrying, the ones I had been told to deliver to Eleanor Vance, were decoys, a test, or a way to draw me in. The name Caldwell kept replaying in my mind. The Caldwells were one of the founding families of this town, their legacy etched into every street name and public building. David Caldwell, the current patriarch, was a powerful, respected figure. But the letters painted a different picture. A ruthless family willing to go to extreme lengths to protect their image and fortune. The boy in the locket, if he was Eleanor's child and a Caldwell, he would have been the rightful heir, or at least a significant claim to the inheritance. And if his existence was a secret, suppressed by the family, then the fire at the Vance house wasn't just an accident. It was an execution, an attempt to erase Eleanor and her son from history. My mind reeled as I connected the dots. The game wasn't some abstract concept. It was a deadly, decades-long struggle for power and wealth, orchestrated by the Caldwells. Anyone who threatened to expose their secret, anyone who got too close to the truth, became a participant. And now that was me. I found a small, hidden clearing deeper in the woods, the canopy of trees thick enough to hide me from prying eyes. My ankle throbbed and my clothes were torn, but I was safe for a moment. I pulled out the letters again, my hands trembling as I read them more carefully this time. Eleanor Vance's letters were heartbreaking, filled with the young woman's anguish and determination. She wrote of her love for a man named Edward Caldwell, David Caldwell's younger brother, who had died tragically young. Their affair was forbidden, their child, a son named Michael, an unspeakable scandal. Edward had secretly made provisions for them, a hidden trust, but after his death, the Caldwell family, led by David, had moved to silence Eleanor and claim the entirety of Edward's estate. Eleanor had tried to fight, to secure her son's future, but she was outmatched. The last letter, written just before the fire, spoke of her fear, her knowledge that they were coming for her, and her desperate attempt to hide the truth, to ensure her son would one day know his heritage. She had entrusted these documents to a trusted friend, a woman named Emily. Emily Henderson? Mrs. Henderson? The pieces were falling into place at an alarming rate. Then there was the more recent anonymous note tucked into the bundle. It was a warning dated only a few months ago. Asterisk, they know you're still looking. The game continues. They will come for anyone who uncovers the truth. The heir is still out there. Find Michael. He's the key. Trust no one. Asterisk. My breath hitched. Find Michael. The heir. The boy in the locket. His name was Michael. My name. Coincidence? Or something far more sinister? The map. I unfolded it carefully. It was a crude drawing of the town, but one location was circled in red ink. A small, unassuming building on the outskirts, near the old train tracks. The old Blackwood orphanage. A shiver ran down my spine. If Eleanor had managed to get her child away before the fire, before she was silenced, the orphanage would have been a logical place. But it had closed down decades ago. My mind raced. If the original Michael was taken to the orphanage, and if the Caldwells were trying to erase him, they would have made sure he disappeared, perhaps adopted under a new name or worse. The note said, "The heir is still out there." Who was looking? Mrs. Henderson? And who wrote the anonymous warning? Someone else trying to expose the Caldwells? The full weight of what I held in my hands, what I had become privy to, crashed down on me. This wasn't just about a burnt-down house and strange deliveries. This was a story of murder, cover-up, and generations of deceit. And I, Michael, the unassuming postman, had stumbled right into the heart of it. I had to get these documents to the authorities. But who could I trust? The Caldwells were powerful. Their influence likely reached every corner of this town, perhaps even the local police. If the anonymous note warned to trust no one, it meant the conspiracy ran deep. A twig snapped nearby. My head shot up, heart pounding. I wasn't alone. I hadn't been careful enough. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, were approaching through the undergrowth. They had tracked me. I scrambled further into the dense foliage, trying to be as silent as possible, my injured ankle protesting with every step. The letters and locket were still clutched tightly in my hand. I couldn't let them fall into the wrong hands. Not now. Not after everything. A beam of light cut through the darkness of the woods, sweeping across the trees. A flashlight. And then a voice, cold and calm, cutting through the night. "We know you're out here, Michael. There's nowhere to run. It's time to finish the game." My blood ran cold. They knew my name. They knew my name. Not the original Michael the heir, but me, Michael the postman. How? Had they been following me for weeks? Was this all a setup designed to draw me in? The voice belonged to a man, but it wasn't the same voice I heard earlier in the attic. This one was smoother, more authoritative. It sent a chill straight to my bones. I pressed myself against the damp earth, trying to disappear into the shadows, the secrets of the Caldwells burning a hole in my hand. I was no longer just an innocent bystander. I was caught in a deadly web, a target, a pawn in a game I hadn't even realized existed until moments ago. And they were closing in. The game, it seemed, was far from over. It had just begun. The small, cold USB drive felt heavy in my palm, a tiny key to a vast, dark secret. Footsteps thudded on the dry leaves outside, drawing closer to the shattered window of the burnt-down house. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. They were here. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm me, but a surge of adrenaline cut through it. I wasn't just running from shadows anymore. I was running with the truth in my hand. I scrambled back, ducking under the broken floor joists, my eyes scanning for any exit. The house was a death trap, a charred labyrinth. I remembered the loose board I'd noticed near the back, half hidden by overgrown weeds. It was my only shot. I moved with a desperate urgency, ignoring the scrapes and splinters, the acrid smell of burnt wood that clung to everything. The shouts grew louder, closer. "He's in here!" A voice barked, guttural and chilling. I burst through the back, tearing through the dense brush, the night air a sudden welcome shock against my face. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I just ran, fueled by the terrifying certainty that if they caught me, this tiny drive, and the truth it held, would vanish forever. I reached my apartment, breathless and shaking, the city lights a blurry comfort through my sweat-stung eyes. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the keys, the USB drive still clutched tight. Inside, I locked the door, pulled the blinds, and finally allowed myself a moment to breathe, leaning against the cool wood, my chest heaving. Then I focused. This wasn't just a piece of technology. It was my only weapon. I inserted the drive into my laptop, the screen flickering to life, mirroring the frantic pulse in my veins. A single folder appeared, labeled only with a string of numbers. Inside, hundreds of files, encrypted documents, fragmented audio recordings, blurred images. I tried the most obvious passwords. The house number, Michael's last name, the date of the fire. Nothing. Frustration gnawed at me, but then I remembered something Michael had muttered. Something about the first letter. I typed in the first letter of every word from the initial letter I'd seen him deliver, the one addressed to a name I knew was false. The folder unlocked. My breath hitched. The screen filled with a cascade of information that ripped apart everything I thought I knew. It wasn't just a burnt house, it was a staged disappearance. The owner, a man named Robert Miller, wasn't dead. He was a former financial analyst, a whistleblower against a colossal shadowy corporation known as Aegis Global. The documents detailed Aegis Global's illicit activities: international money laundering, illegal arms dealing, using shell companies to destabilize markets and fund dark operations. Robert Miller had gathered irrefutable evidence, enough to bring down the entire organization, but they found him before he could go public. The fire, the burnt house, it was all a meticulously crafted deception. Robert had anticipated their move. He had prearranged his own death, creating a detailed contingency plan. He staged the fire, leaving just enough forensic evidence to confirm a fatality, but he himself escaped, going deep underground. And Michael, the postman. My mind reeled. Michael wasn't just a naive mail carrier. He was Robert Miller's brother-in-law, his most trusted confidant. The deliveries to a burnt house weren't deliveries at all. They were a sophisticated dead drop system. Every few weeks, under the guise of delivering mail to a non-existent address, Michael would access a hidden compartment within the charred remains of the house. Robert, from his secret location, would leave new data, new instructions, new pieces of the puzzle he was still assembling, even in hiding. The specific letters Michael carried, the ones with the strange codes or seemingly random names, weren't for the house. They were signals. Signals that Robert was safe, that he needed more time, or most terrifyingly, that he was compromised. The USB drive I held was Robert's final desperate act. It contained the complete, unedited ledger of Aegis Global's crimes, along with a detailed list of their key players and their hidden assets. It was meant to be released if Michael ever stopped his deliveries, or if Robert himself went silent. It was a digital doomsday device, designed to detonate if Aegis Global thought they had won. A name flashed across one of the decrypted files, a name that sent a chill down my spine: Brenda Hayes. She wasn't just a name. She was the head of Aegis Global's Special Operations Division, a ruthless enforcer responsible for silencing anyone who threatened their empire. Her face, cold and unyielding, stared out from a grainy photo, confirming the dread I felt. She was the one leading the hunt, the one whose voice I'd heard outside the burnt house. I was no longer just a curious observer. I was Robert Miller's unwitting successor. I had inherited his mission and his enemies. The weight of it pressed down on me, suffocating. I couldn't go to the local police. Aegis Global's reach was too vast, too deep. They had moles everywhere, in every institution. Trusting the wrong person would be a fatal mistake. I scrolled through Robert's files, looking for a way out, a contact, anything. Then I found it. A secure encrypted channel, a name, Emily Carter, described as a clean agent, within a specific federal agency, someone Robert had vetted meticulously. She was his last resort, his final hope. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a desperate dance against time. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just hand over the drive. It was too risky. I had to ensure the information was disseminated, replicated, made impossible to suppress. I uploaded the entire contents of the USB drive to multiple secure, anonymous servers, encrypting it again with layers of robust code. I crafted an anonymous email, attaching the decryption keys and the instructions for Emily Carter, and sent it to several prominent investigative journalists Robert had identified, along with the direct contact information for Emily. I included a message: the postman's last delivery, Robert Miller's legacy. Just as the final upload bar crawled to 100%, a sudden jarring crash echoed from downstairs. The front door of my apartment building had been breached. They were here. My heart leaped into my throat. Brenda Hayes. I slammed the laptop shut, yanking the USB drive free, stuffing it into my pocket. There was no escape. I could hear their heavy boots on the stairs nearing my floor. I had mere seconds. I grabbed my phone, opened a pre-written message to Emily Carter, containing a single cryptic phrase. The package is delivered. Check secure channels. The postman's work is done. I hit send. The door burst open with a splintering crack, revealing Brenda Hayes, flanked by two hulking figures. Her eyes, cold and devoid of emotion, locked onto mine. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips. A predator who had finally cornered its prey. "Well, well," she purred, her voice like ice. "The curious cat. You've certainly made a mess, haven't you?" My hands were empty. My laptop was dark. But the messages were sent. The files were out. I met her gaze, a strange calm settling over me amidst the terror. "The mess," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "was already there. I just shone a light on it." Her smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "A mistake you'll regret." "Perhaps," I replied, a defiant glint in my eye. "But the world won't." She gestured to her men. They moved in fast and efficient. I knew what was coming. I knew my fate was sealed. But as their hands clamped around my arms, a profound sense of peace settled over me. I might be silenced, but Robert Miller's truth would not be. The game was far from over, Brenda Hayes. It had only just begun. And this time it was being played on a much larger stage.